Hey everyone coming in. I'm just going to give it a few seconds for people to trickle in here before we get started. Everybody's trickling in here, just giving a little bit of time to get everybody in. Okay. Seems like we've got most people in. I'm sure there will be some late arrivals, but they can just catch up where we are. Good afternoon, everyone. If it is indeed afternoon where you are, if not, good morning, good evening. My name is Clay Pruitt. I am the ShortFest Forum producer. I'm extremely thrilled to be able to present the forums this year despite the world circumstances. One silver lining that I think has come out of this is that, I think a lot of short filmmakers sometimes don't have the resources to attend the in-person festival. So at least this way, since we're all virtual, we're able to welcome people from all around the world and give you the opportunity to hear from incredible panelists, such as these fine folks in front of you, who've been so generous with their time to come here today to speak with you all. Just before we get started, I want to say on behalf of the festival, we want to acknowledge the pain and anger we're all feeling right now. Not just about the most recent events we've witnessed, but also the longstanding history of injustice and inequality. We stand with the Black Lives Matter movement, and we are committed to working together to move our community, our country, our world to closer to unity, understanding, and inclusivity. Just quickly before we kick things off, I want to call your attention to the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. That is the place to put your questions. We will get to those towards the end of the discussion. For anybody who might want this, this session is being captioned in English. So that function is also located at the bottom of your screen if you want to enable those. This session is being recorded for future use. And without further ado, I'm going to kick things over to our moderator today, Sheila Rowan-Legg.
Thank you, Clay, and hello, everyone, hopefully around the world. It's great to be here and to be with these wonderful panelists. Yes, as Clay said, I'll be moderating the panel. But in my background, I'm a filmmaker, a film critic. I program for a film festival called ShortFest in London, and I'm a consultant. I've been working in film for a very long time, so really thrilled to be with these amazing people who will introduce you. They will introduce themselves much better than I'm sure. We're going to do this in alphabetical order. So first we'll have Shelby.
Hi, my name is Shelby Knox. I am originally a documentary subject from the education of Shelby Knox, which took me into a of feminist activism at Move On and Change.org. And then I got the opportunity to move into impact producing. I worked on the first ever impact campaign that Netflix financed for Audrey and Daisy. And I am now on Dilemma of Desire, which is at AFI this weekend. Our 24 hours are on Sunday.
Amazing. And next, Liz.
Hi. Liz Manischel, writer, director, producer, and I currently work at Impact Distribution Agency Picture Motion. That's enough of me.
And Jared.
I'll try to compete with Liz. My name is Jared Milrad, and background is mostly in advocacy and impact. Worked for President Obama on his campaigns, and then worked with Warren Buffett's son Peter on a Access to Justice nonprofit that I launched in Chicago, now based in the LA area, and launched a company called A Show for a Change. And our main product is called Movie Karma, which is a streaming platform that helps you watch a movie and then take action off of that content in real time. mostly to support charities and the filmmakers behind those films. So it's all social impact driven, and really excited to be here.
And Brandy.
Hi, I'm Brandy Nicole Payne. I am a writer, actor, filmmaker. I'm currently based in Memphis, Tennessee, but I've lived in LA and Atlanta, and I'm here because I've made 2 shorts that have had some social impact, and I'm starting third and really looking forward to talking about it.
You know, obviously this is the kind of thing we've all been thinking about more and more in the past, not just in the past couple of weeks, but in the past several years. I think, what is the impact of all art? You know, film, television, literature, theater, and what it means when we get to see certain kinds of stories, and what impact those stories have on us, and what impact they have on society. If you could each in turn maybe just talk about, when you hear that idea of impact, what it means to you in your life and in your work and what you want to achieve. Maybe Brandy, do you want to go first?
Sure. So when I think of impact, I mean, obviously I hope that all artists are wanting every story they tell to have some sort of impact, whether it's on a personal level or on a global level. For me, I consider myself an artivist, an artist who does activism through their art, specifically with writing and performing. And so what that means to me is that I'm hoping, when I'm writing things, I'm writing to be able to connect with my audience. I'm writing to give a voice to people who don't always have one. Right now, we're seeing a lot of voices ring out because their voices have been for more than 400 years in this country. And so I think that I've heard this quote that says an artist's job is to make the revolution irresistible. And I agree with that 100%.
Okay. Shelby?
Sorry, let me unmute myself. When I had a film made on me, I was 19 when it came out, and it started to go across the country. It was a POV film, and it was about sex education. And I would go to these communities, and there would be screenings hosted by NARAL and Planned Parenthood and sex ed organizations. And they would tell me that this film was their opportunity to have a conversation that their community desperately needed to have. And that there were dozens of stories just like mine in that community that didn't have a voice until there was a film that they could interact around. And so for me, the point of impact is to give a film, whether it be a short, a narrative, a documentary, as a tool to partners, to organizations, to activists, to people who are already leading this work, to give them another tool to do the work that they are the experts on, so that they can start these conversations, that they can educate people, so that they can fundraise around it. But I always see the film as rooted in movements, or else it's not going to have the impact, because each community needs those leaders to support the message and to translate it for the community. And without that, it's just going to disappear. It's just going to be something you see and don't think about again.
Jared?
Yeah, just to build on what everyone said. I mean, for me, coming from an advocacy background, having run organizations and been part of nonprofits and political campaigns, it really is for me sort of moving beyond just awareness. I think awareness is so important. I think the art itself can move and inspire. To Brandy's point, by in sort of lifting up those underrepresented voices. But we at Movie Karma try to move beyond that as well, and try to do, dollars raised, petitions signed, funds shifted. When we think about Hollywood, like putting their money where their mouth is when they talk about diversity and inclusion. So for me, it's like, let's see what your budget looks like. Let's see if we can support organizations who are doing the work in real time. And that's kind of the challenge and conundrum we're trying to move past, as opposed to just applause at a film festival, which is great. But like, let's also pray and move our feet at the same time. That's really the work we're trying to do.
Liz?
Yeah, I was just thinking about it to add to the conversation rather than being redundant, because I would end up being redundant if I were to talk about what we do at Picture Motion. From an audience perspective, I remember seeing the film The Devil We Know, and like after watching it, immediately throwing out all my nonstick pans. And I would say that's like that's the anecdote I tell. Like, I was impacted so much by this film that I took action, and now I no longer use nonstick products. So like, impact to me is the direct change you can make in your life, and it's usually inspired by the art that we're all talking about.
Mhm. Well, that's it. I mean, it's one thing, and you know, as we're learning right now, it's one thing to post something on Facebook or to tweet about it. It's or even to say you're going to make a pledge to make a change. And often, as we know, these pledges never actually amount to anything. Unfortunately, I think to Viola Davis when she won her Academy Award, saying what were Black women missing? They were missing opportunity, and this is the case with so many people, you know, who are in marginalized groups. What they are missing is the opportunity. So for each of you, what do you think is the opportunities that you want in your career, or you want to give to people? You know, with, you know, looking specifically within the film community. I mean, not just shorts, but features or whatever. What is the way that you want to give impact?
I'll definitely start with that.
Yeah.
Because especially with today being Juneteenth, you know, people are celebrating it, which is wonderful. But I just retweeted someone who said, you know, yeah, in lieu of cash, hire us, trust us, and not just in entry-level positions. Like, trust that we've done the work, trust that we've trained, trust that we are experts of our own experience, and give us that access. I appreciate everyone who are looking for people to mentor. That is wonderful, and it has its place. It's something that we all should do, but also know that you have peers as well. And so be willing to make some room at the table for them to join you at the same level. That is definitely my clarion call.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Shelby, if you want to go, I don't want to cut you off.
Oh, wasn't me.
I was just gonna say, just to snap that and build on that. I think you know, like for me, it's about lifting up the art and the opportunities that filmmakers are already seeking and often are not getting. So, for example, we just celebrated a film called Hope Village, which is by an amazing you know, Black filmmaker and editor who made a film about a Black woman struggling with addiction, and how we can lift up those stories and really help people like her and the work that she's doing around addiction recovery. So for us, through our platform, Movie Karma, and through our company, we're just trying to celebrate those voices and provide more access and opportunity to those voices, not as an act of charity, but because that work is already being done, and it's often just not being celebrated and appreciated. So that, for me as a writer director as well, it's the stories that I want to tell. And for me, the best compliment is when someone who's underrepresented says to me, I'm finally heard. That to me is like the best thing ever. If I can just get out of the way and help to lift up those voices through whatever privilege I have, that's the kind of opportunity I want to provide.
And I would just add on to that. I feel like I would give filmmakers permission not to have to be activists who know everything and who have decades of experience in these movements. One of the most painful things in impact is when I see film feeling like they have to start organizations, create materials, create, you know, task forces and things like that. Those resources exist within existing justice movements. There are people who have been doing this work for years, who are the most impacted, who understand what communities need. And I would like to give filmmakers the freedom and encourage them to really make strong partnerships with those organizers and those organizations, and ask them what they need. Ask them where your film can slip into the work that they've been doing for decades, and you'll make a much longer lasting impact that way.
A lot of impact occurs throughout a film's life cycle, but a lot of it happens in this window called the semi-theatrical or community screenings window, which is like in between your festival premiere and your consumer release, depending on what kind of distribution strategy you're aiming for. And I'm like the weird capitalist who works in impact distribution. So I just want to kind of encourage the concept that there are audiences who want to see your film that are in this window. Maybe you don't have an impact goal for your film, but you want to connect with middle schoolers because emotionally you made this film for your middle school self. So the impact can be getting your film out there, connecting it with audiences, and being in that semi-theatrical world. It may not always have a concrete action. It may just be eyeballs.
Yeah.
Well, drawing on that, oh, sorry, I would just say drawing on that, how would you encourage with short filmmakers or any, filmmakers work they're doing, if they want their film to have a certain kind of impact, how would they, this seems like such a general and yet such a specific point, how do they go about finding the resources to do that and finding the audience that they want to reach that maybe is just beyond, oh, I just want somebody at a film festival to come and see my movie?
I was just going to second what Liz said just quickly about one way is to do it is through charity. So there are a lot of nonprofits we've discovered who are hungry for the talent that all of you have out there as storytellers and don't have a way to do it themselves, or they've made some content and don't really know quite how to have that direct impact with those stories. And kind of just, it's living on social media or it's living on their website. And so one thing I would encourage is to connect with nonprofits, and we're happy to help as much as we can who are doing the work. And so that you can do some measurable tracking in terms of donations raised, actions taken, legislation passed, as the case may be, to really shift the needle on your issue.
One thing that I did with my, the first film that second one that I produced, it was called Aloha. And it's like the log line was like, it's a charming film about a first-time mother who experiences pregnancy complications. But it ultimately turns out to be a film about infant loss and talking about it and not being afraid to talk about it. And so what we did was we used Google Forms, which is free, to create audience surveys. And what that was about 7 to 10 questions where I started off by introducing myself, and then I'm about to make this film, this is what it falls under. And I asked very direct questions. Have you experienced some form of infant loss, whether that's a miscarriage or actually having a stillborn, or someone in family? Did you talk about it? What sort of things did people say to you that that hurt, that they had good intentions, but it hurt? And so I asked these questions, and then I also, when you use Google Forms, you can, they can include their email address, or it could be anonymous. And at the very end, I said, would you like to be kept in touch with as the film develops? And some of them chose to, and some of them did not. But I asked very straightforward questions, and I posted it on Twitter and on Facebook, and then people shared and shared and shared, and it found its way into certain Facebook groups that I was not a part of. The admins and moderators of those groups reached out to me and was like, hey, can you just put a little more info at the top of the form about who you are? Because I have some members who actually want to answer this, but they're very scared about what you plan to do with that information. And I appreciated that feedback so much. It made so much sense. And so once I did that, I think we ended up getting like somewhere around 300 responses, and I personally knew about 20. So all those other people were people who I would have never reached, because I am not a celebrity. I would have never reached them on my own, but because my community shared that and it was free to do, all it did was take my time. But that was a way for me to begin to build my audience around this particular issue. And then sure enough, when the film was released, they watched it, and a lot of them, it resonated with them. So Google Forms, audience surveys, I encourage any short filmmaker to take part of that.
Just want to weigh in terms of processes and systems. A lot of what we do in impact distribution is smiling and dialing or looking at spreadsheets. I mean, there are very concrete tools you can use. A Google search. So if you're looking for nonprofits that are in the reproductive justice, hemisphere, or stratosphere would be a more appropriate term, you can Google that terminology and then create a spreadsheet and then create a script for yourself and start smiling and dialing, which is just making phone calls and pitching your film for community screenings, educational sales. There actually is no orthodoxy to all of this. It's all what we've learned through trial and error.
And I'll just add one more resource. I work on a lot of feminist films, and every director I have, I said, if you have $1,000 to send someone to the National Women's Studies Association conference, you can get your film in studies classrooms all across the country. Professional organizers, conferences, things like that, where there's a niche group of people who are interested in your issue is a great place to workshop a film. Or when you have a finished film, if you have an impact campaign that you're just developing, they are great resources to tell you, again, how they could most use the product that you've developed.
Yeah.
That's great. Sorry, go ahead, Jared.
this is such a good conversation. I just want to add to that foundations. So there are foundations as well that want to give you money to make impact content. And I know there's an effort afoot through something called the Impact Guild to do just that and to really centralize and put under one umbrella resources for you to have the impact you're having, and to Liz's and everyone's point, to track that impact as well through measurable outcomes.
If there's any Canadians watching, there is a great organization called Reel Canada, REEL, that actually works to bring Canadian films into our schools, to whether they're about a specific topic or just, hey, let's watch a Canadian movie. Because unfortunately, not a lot of Canadians watch Canadian movies. But that's, I don't know if organizations like that exist in other countries in the world. Or if Reel Canada is unique in that. But here's an opportunity for somebody to create an organization like that. What would you think, like, I know a lot of, filmmakers, whether it be a short or a feature or a television show, often, they'll start on a project because they want to tackle a particular topic. And then, of course, the decision, are you going to make a documentary or are you going to make a narrative? Fiction narrative. And then I think, especially if it's a fiction narrative, I know a lot of filmmakers, when I'm discussing things with them, especially around, because my expertise is in, horror and sci-fi, where things can get weird in a story. How do you talk to ever filmmakers, or do you have advice regarding how do you bring together when you want to tackle a subject, when you want it to have an impact, and yet you still want artistic integrity, you still want it to be a great film? Because a bad film, even if it has a good message, can just, be in and out of somebody's brain. That was
I just want to make sure. Well, I just want to make sure that I got the question right. Like, how do you balance the narrative if it's like based on real life things, but still have like creative license? Is that?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah. So with the first film that I wrote and produced, it was directed by Rachel Goldberg. It's called Muted, and it was inspired by So first of all, it was about a Black family whose 16-year-old daughter goes missing, and the discrepancies with children of color versus their white counterparts, both in law enforcement and in the media. And so it was inspired by the story of Mitrice Richardson, who is a real life young woman who went missing. Beautiful, beautiful girl in her 20s, and was ultimately found deceased in the hills of Malibu. And it was a really big story in LA, and I lived in LA at the time. But like, I went to college in Texas, and I was so pissed off that none of my friends in Texas had heard about it, because it wasn't getting the national coverage that I would have expected it to get. And so I don't have any experience in the documentary space, which is why I wrote it as a narrative. But I was very careful, even when I brought her up, when we brought her up during Q&As, to be very clear that it was inspired by her story, but it did not follow those lines, because I did want to be able to have that sort of freedom. My personal take on it is that this is still a form of entertainment. It is still a story, and so I am not going to always follow the timeline of things, which is why I'm not making a documentary. If I were to make a documentary, that would absolutely need to be, even the ones that kind of veer into the whole entertaining documentary space, you just have to follow, like, this is the facts, this is what happened. But that's the freedom of being able to make narrative work, is that it's still your story to shape as you see fit, and you have to make the decisions that serve the story best.
Yeah, and I would say, add to that, I did a short film that I wrote directed about a undocumented Mexican-American immigrant family in the United States. And even though, I have a background in law, I've done, I think, a fair amount of advocacy work in different areas, I'm obviously not of that background. And so I think what's important is to center the people who share that background or can speak to that background. And so bringing on people who, either as your co-writers or co-directors or your talent, asking them to weigh in and have that agency in what you're creating, so that you're not just sort of telling a story that you may not fully either understand or could speak to. So the work I try to do is just to center those voices. And to me, that brings integrity to the work and to the impact you're trying to have. And I think also makes it a bigger and more powerful effort than either party doing that alone.
Mm-hmm. sorry, further to that then, I think, and coming off what you said, Jared, what do you do in those situations when you are writing a story or you're making a film that is not something of which you have direct personal experience, like, you know, you're making a film about a Mexican American family, or if you're a straight person who writes a gay character, a Black woman writing the experience of an Indigenous man, like what happens when you step outside your own experience? And this is obviously an issue far more for white people who have been appropriating voices for so long. How do you make sure, because if you want it to have the impact, and you want to have characters like that, say you don't want everybody to just look and be exactly like you want that variety, even if it fits in the narrative, or just because, you know, why not have this character be paid by a woman instead of a man, or, you know, somebody who's in a wheelchair as opposed to able-bodied? How do you, what are ways you can go about that so it has the, I'm not, I suppose positive impact is the expression I want to use here.
I think what he mentioned a moment ago about centering is critical. Because for me, even when I do see stories that feature a person of color, Black or otherwise, and the writer, director, producers are all white, I'm immediately like, what is this? Same thing for if I see a story that is about a woman, because that's very popular right now. But everyone everyone whose input matters, everyone who has a voice that the studios will listen to are all men, and it's a story of women. Again, what is this? So yes, you have to bring in people from that culture, that gender, whoever that story is about. Those people need to be a part of the story making process. And it can't be a power dynamic where they're afraid to tell you the real because they'll be fired. You know what I mean? It can't, because then what are we doing? If you want it to be authentic, it's got to be we've got to be doing this and creating this story together.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the fact is, especially if you are a white person, a cisgender person, a straight person, sometimes what could be a painful fact is you are not the person to tell that story. That your responsibility in that moment, I work in documentary, and I feel like even if you find, you know, if you're a white woman and you find the most amazing story about Indigenous young organizers, that's not your film to make. You have the responsibility, if you want to help a young Native filmmaker raise the money, or use your nonprofit as a fiscal sponsor, or sometimes that is just your response. It's not your story. And you should know that, and know that you could do more harm. You will do more harm. And the best thing you can do in this situation is to find the person who can tell that story and help them in every way that you can.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, Shelby. And I think also, to Brandy's point, like, you know, we just shot a pilot with a Black woman, the center of the arc, of the narrative arc, and she's a friend of mine. So we actually sat down, and she's a producer on the project. So you know, she had ownership in the piece, and then also was so excited about crafting an arc and a narrative that was more than just, you know, her skin color or her gender. That was actually a full character arc. So I think, again, just giving the folks agency to decide, is this something they want to do, and how do they want to shape that narrative? And I should say, I don't know, maybe some of us are at this status, but I know I'm not, which is, if you're making a bigger budget project, to Brandy's point, the money also has to be, you know, fair and equitable. It shouldn't just be about a title. It should be about who's getting compensated and who's getting the credit for the work that they do.
I think money, always the big issue, unfortunately, with everybody. If you don't have the money, nothing really happens. But certainly when you're making short films, you can make a micro budget short film that ends up being amazing. There's wiggle room within the shorts. And, you know, where do you feel like, when somebody, you know, I've got this idea for a film, be it a shorter feature, I don't have a lot of money, but I want it to make an impact. What should the focus be? Should it be in the story? Should it be in the cast? Is it a whole bunch of different factors, especially when you're talking about money and the investment?
I don't have an answer, but I haven't talked for a while, so I'm just going to try to think. I'm just going to press unmute and see what happens. I think deciding what kind of distribution you're looking for the film ultimately will inform what kind of story you want to tell. If you're looking to distribute this in classrooms as an educational piece, like a lot of films at that 42-minute length, that broadcast hour length can be easily cut to like a classroom hour, and you pair it with a study guide. And then you look and make sure it's substantial. Is it educating people in the classroom? I'm a big believer though that you follow your soul as an artist, and that you write the scripts that you feel inspired to write, and then ultimately at the end you adjust your plans to what came out of you. So there are different ways to look at it: reverse engineering, or just really kind of following your instincts.
Yeah, everything that she said is absolutely correct. I can't say that there's one part that matters more than the other, because it's a whole tapestry that all comes together. I will say it starts with the story. So, you could have a fantastic A-list actress, but if your story is not where it needs to be, what are we doing? So, so it starts with the story. And I will say, I do want to mention, especially since I haven't made a feature, I've made some shorts, and they've all been in the 20K range. If you can cast someone who is somewhat known, that helps, because again, even on the shorts level, visibility helps. And so with Muted, Rachel is friends with Robin Lippin, who is a casting director based out of LA, and Robin Lippin agreed to cast specifically the lead. We had actually already cast someone, and who was also known, and then unfortunately her husband died, and obviously everything stopped at that point, and so we had to kind of go back to the drawing board. And so Robin suggested Chandra Wilson, who is one of the stars of Grey's Anatomy, and she signed on. And she signed on for little money, which blew us away. And I've learned since then, now that I have a lot of friends who've made shorts with people who are known, with actors who are known, they believe in the story. If you can get the script to them and they believe in the story, they will work with you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. It all starts with story to me as well. And I think authenticity. We've had Iranian filmmakers that we've awarded through our film festival that we run online for socially conscious films, and there's a story that I couldn't have told, but we feel like that are important to celebrate. And we've had filmmakers from Spain, and we've had filmmakers from Britain who've told stories about issues in Mozambique and really centered those individuals. So I think it really does start, to Brandon's point, with story. I think it also starts with the team that you bring on board. I think looking for quality. Again, to build on everyone's point, there are filmmakers and writers and producers who are looking for opportunity. So if you can go to folks who A, know what they're doing, B, maybe have some credits behind them, but C, also you want to lift up, right, and celebrate. And so for me, as I'm building out a team, I'm thinking about, okay, can my cinematographer be someone who hasn't had as much opportunity perhaps as a white straight cisgender man, right? Can I build a team that is inclusive and reflective of the kind of story you want to tell? And I think the points about distribution are so critical. I know I, as a filmmaker, often forget. We sometimes get so lost in our story that we think everyone's going to want to watch it, but you really do have to think about where it will end up.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and there was a panel on distribution earlier, which will be available, I believe, if you've registered for our attendees here. So check that out on the film festival's website. And there's going to be, I believe, another panel tomorrow with short film distributors. So that's a huge hurdle. That's it. I mean, we've talked a little bit about this. How do you make sure you get your short film in front of the right people, so it has the impact, not only artistically, but in terms of whatever issue you're talking about. So I think we have to tell the story as it should be. What are the negative things that you've seen when each of you have been trying to push forward in terms of films having an impact? If you could talk about the barriers that you faced and how you've worked around them. Liz, do you want to start?
As a filmmaker, I'm a feature writer director, and I don't work in impact. So I'm thinking about, like, from my workplace, like, what have we, what blockades we run into. You know, I ran the screening tour for The Cave, which was the Oscar-nominated documentary about this Syrian hospital. It's one of the best movies ever. Biased. But I would say a lot of what I ran up against was either like, well, I would say one was the film is incredibly graphic and disturbing. So we were pitching in part to high schools, colleges, nonprofits, and the high schools, that was like a gut check, was like they had to watch the content in advance. So if you're making content that's aimed to be impactful, really make sure that you're considerate about the audiences that you're pitching to. And I don't know if you believe in trigger warnings or disclaimers, but that could always be a part of the pitch. And then I was also just thinking of, if it's topical, a nonprofit may have infighting. Like, we ran into some Islamic organizations or organizations that were related to the Syrian diaspora who didn't want to screen the film because it was an event that was going on. The war is ongoing. So it's like they thought that the film would create sort of divisiveness within the organization. So I think just being aware of the context of your film, who you're pitching, and all of the potential blowbacks that may come from that pitch.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think those are all correct. We've run into many, barriers with trying to celebrate other folks' films and also some of our own that we've produced. I think some of it is that, a lot of times there's a sense that the broader industry doesn't seem to care about impact content, to be frank. I think there's, if there's not a revenue number attached to it that's appealing, that sometimes we found is the challenge for some of our filmmakers. I would say that, to some of the things that have already been said, connecting with the right nonprofit organization doing the work, the right school doing the work that cares about that topic. We've also found social media, actually, interestingly, when we've shared clips of interviews we've done with impact filmmakers, there are spaces on social media for those types of stories to sort of lift those up and celebrate them. And I think just continuing to find the right places for those right stories. It's sort of, to me, in my mind, sort of slotting in those opportunities. And we try to play matchmaker as much as we can between a filmmaker and a charity, or a filmmaker and a brand, or a filmmaker and an influencer. One story I'll actually tell, though, on the flip side, quickly, we had an Oscar-nominated filmmaker of a film called Assad, a guy named Brian Buckley. He's a great example of centering underrepresented voices. The film's about Somali refugees, and was nominated for a live action short at the Oscars a few years ago. It had actually done its Netflix run. He came to us and said, we want to have an actual impact with this film, beyond just it being on a traditional streaming platform. So that's the flip side. If that gives any comfort to any of you who are starting out, there are people who are much farther along who are also thinking about this, and how do we connect their own projects with direct impact.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say for me, the main barrier was money, making it, because with and with Aloha, we had to crowdfund because they weren't. I mean, with Muted, yes, we do have a feature script, and maybe one day it will get made. But with Aloha, it was always meant to be a short, and that's it. And so it's hard to find an investor for something that most likely will not make money, because that's not what we were making these movies for. So we had to crowdfund. And so with Muted, we crowdfunded on Kickstarter. And then with Aloha, we moved from Kickstarter over to Seed and Spark, which now I actually work for as a crowdfunding specialist. It's a really awesome day job, a great company. But yeah, so we had to crowdfund in order to be able to make the film, because they were both around so they're not necessarily micro budget, kind of micro budget for film, but certainly not micro budget for my pockets. And so that's how we made it. And not only did it, allow us to be able to pay people a pittance anyway, not their normal rates, but it also gave us an opportunity to start to drive that message already, to start to build the audience who cared about these issues, right, even before the film came out. So once the film was released, we already had an audience who was ready and willing to see it because they had invested in it by contributing their time, their energy, and their money to making it happen.
I'll just add
that on a funding level, that the systemic oppression, systemic racism, sexism, transphobia are also present in the foundation world, very much so. And so you can run into, there's, you know, from the funny that someone on the film I'm working with now said they couldn't like lift our proposal because they couldn't say the word clitoris to their male boss, which is funny, to another film I worked on that someone actually said, oh, well, we did a Native film last year, which is incredibly screwed up. And so getting to funders who are of an experience, who are willing to take on projects that are doing innovative work, is sometimes a difficult thing to navigate. And that's where you find yourself really looking to your advisors, to your subjects, to the nonprofits, and seeing who's really in the work and who's already given money, because it's possible that these like film impact places, while they do some good work, they're not willing to go for the really radical progressive films. And then I will say another barrier, and this is just something that annoys me so much, is that when you as an impact campaign create materials and they live for the life of your campaign and they're so fantastic, and then they just die once the impact campaign is over. And so I always tell folks to find a couple partners at the very beginning who the terms of your partnership will be to hold those materials and keep using them and put them on their website. Because I feel like we do all this work, we raise all this money, and then if they only are used for 6 months, did we really have any impact at all?
You're talking about like physical materials?
So like for Audrey and Daisy, we developed an entire career used with that film, teaching about sexual assault in high schools.
Okay.
And we had a website of ours that we used when Netflix was funding the Impact campaign, and it was fantastic, and it was being used in over 500 schools. And then that Impact campaign was over. Those materials were going to live on a dead website until Futures Without Violence, which is an organization out of California that does sexual assault awareness work, took them on and continues to use them in their programs. As an impact producer, I should have had that from the very beginning.
That's a great point, because I hate it, but with Muted, we had a website and did like 6 years ago now. And so on the website, we had resources for people of color who are missing. Like it pointed them to the Black and Missing Foundation, which was one organization that we did partner with, but it also gave them steps, like if your loved one, because for like 3 years, and sometimes even still now, I will get tagged on Facebook whenever someone goes missing, whenever someone Black goes missing, and say, hey, what tips can you provide? And so I had a whole email to be ready to like send out, these are things that I've learned that you should do. And so we had these resources on the website, and when we finally let the website go, that was all gone. And so now, you know, we're still pointing people to this organization site. But yes, I definitely learned for my next one that, okay, where is this going to go whenever this is over and we move on to another project, because those resources are still valuable.
Is that something that people, in, you know, especially sorry, let me get my words out, with an impact, you know, when they want to make an impact, how much is having those sorts of resources, if it's about a topic like sexual violence, like missing Black people, you know, persons, what, you know, how is a website a viable option? Is making yourself available as a contact for years to come an option for everyone? And if not, what are some other tips that you might be able to give people who want to make sure that the issue doesn't die just because nobody's watching their film anymore?
I was going to try to tackle the first part of your question, and maybe but the importance of these resources. We have a whole department at Picture Motion, which is like a 14-person company, and 3 of those people are devoted to strategy, which is they just research the messaging, the topics, the history, the context of that subject matter, so that it can inform something like a discussion guide or discussion questions. Like it could be a base level document of just 10 questions that could elicit a substantive response in an audience. So there's a lot of thought and care that I think all of us would encourage people putting into these resources. I also just wanted to like share a trick that we use. Dropbox has a section, I think it's an add-on, so I don't know the cost of it, I'm so sorry, but it's called Showcase. And you can upload documents to this, something like a discussion guide, stills, trailer. You could upload videos and stills and documents, PDFs, where screening hosts can easily download those and share those, and you get analytics from it. You get to see how many views, how many people have downloaded. So if you no longer house something on a website, but maybe you can afford the add-on a Dropbox possibly, that can be an evergreen resource that people can go to if that link is shared amongst all of your screening hosts and partners.
That's really good. I think so often, you know, shorts or features that have an impact regarding a certain issue, people want to know more, but they don't always have access to it. So that could be part of your, if you want to make a film like this, you know, make it part of your budget, make it part of your mandate to make sure that people know. I always think back to the sitcoms which were, you know, the episode would be about something, and it's like, if you want to learn more about this topic, one of the cast members would say, I don't know
Blossom.
if they do that.
Do people reference Blossom anymore? Is it too long?
Yeah.
And I saw there was a question actually about that point, I think from Dean, about the length of the impact campaigns, like how long you should keep doing the work, and what if you run out of funds. I'll just quickly comment on that. I think building on what Liz said, perhaps just if you can have a deliverable, like a target of what you're trying to achieve, maybe you won't get there. Maybe you can hand that work off to an organization or others who are already doing that work. I think about, for example, rape kit testing and the backlog of rape kits. There have been some powerful films about that issue, but there are also organizations doing that work and trying to pass legislation and trying to get movement on some of those issues. So if you can find a point to hand off. I will say, and Dean, you mentioned it in your question on funding. Just to build on what everyone else has said before I forget, there should be, I think, democratized funding for this type of work. And I think there should be, you know, talking to my friends in Europe, for example, who are filmmakers, and there's a national fund, a film fund that they can go to. I hope one day we can all, march for and find some progress on that issue, because I think there should be an impact film fund to support all the work.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah. Grateful to be in Canada, where we do have, you know, government funding for all of the arts in a way that unfortunately the United States does not. Something I talk about with my filmmaker friends in the States, you know, the reliance upon soft money as opposed to just getting a check, which you can do. And certainly, and a lot of government agencies like Canada Council, like BFI in England, there's a lot, you know, if your film is making an impact, if you make sure you involve people from unheard, you know, marginalized groups, that actually does help you financially. It's sad that we have to resort to financial incentives, but if it works, then hopefully one day we won't need them. But I think that's good actually to segue into the Q&A portion, where some specific questions that we had. First up, this is from about half an hour ago. Can Shelby please repeat the organization she mentioned if you have $1,000? Like, yeah, I can't remember what that was.
I was talking about, I work in feminist films, and the National Women's Studies Association is where all of the women's studies professors in the country go from every year. If you can get your film screened there, or you can get a booth and go and meet people, and you have a vested interest in getting your films into gender studies classrooms, that is like the first place I tell filmmakers that you need to go, because they're all in one place.
Yeah, I'm gonna make a note of that. This is a very interesting question. What are your thoughts regarding films that were meant to give a positive impact but backfired instead? Not because there was misinformation within the film, but rather because people just weren't ready for it.
Oh man, that unfortunately is the double-edged sword of being an artist. Being an artist, period, your job is not to dictate the outcome. Your job is to serve the story. Your job is to do the work and to do your in the work. And so to answer this question, which is saying we did our part, but they weren't ready, unfortunately, there's nothing that you can do about that. Hopefully, 4 or 5, 10 years from now, you'll be able to look back and the world will be able to catch up with you and see what you were doing. It's so interesting too, because I just watched on Netflix The 2 Killings of Sam Cooke, which is about exactly this, and how like his songs in particular, Change Is Gonna Come, how freaking relevant it still is to, and how a lot of the stuff that he was putting out, they absolutely were not ready for then, but it's still reverberating now. But it's not your job to dictate that outcome. It's your job to serve your mission. And the people that it's going to resonate with, it will resonate with. As long as you know that you've actually actually done your due diligence and you're not further perpetuating harm, no matter what your issue is, to me, that's what matters. But you, especially depending on what area of impact your film is about, you sort of gird your loins that is a real possibility.
Yeah.
I mean, I've worked on one. I mean, I worked on a film, it's called Bebe. It was about a Chinese woman in Indiana who attempted suicide while she was 8 months pregnant and she lost the baby. She was charged with murder and spent a year in prison. This film was made in a world where we thought we would have a Hillary presidency, that this film would be used by reproductive justice organizations to roll back some of the draconian measures that have gone down in red states. The fetal personhood, so she was convicted, or she was charged under a fetal personhood law. And we were looking at a world in which reproductive justice activism would be so much more than the base of people with uteruses are humans and we should treat them as that. We were looking at a film that would press forward in a Hillary administration, and we have Trump, and that film, like even RJ organizations are just like, this is not the time for this film. This is an important issue. We want this film, but like, yeah. And so sometimes you do that, and it's, as Brandy was saying, like that's not your fault. But I will say, if you think a film is only relevant in one particular context, in one political context, hurry and get it done. I know that's so hard to say to filmmakers because money and all of that stuff, but sometimes you are actually too late with an issue, and it sucks.
Yeah, I was just going to second what everyone said. There are folks who've come before us who, like Sidney Poitier and others who've done work that you could imagine. I was looking back at a film called Defiant Ones in 1958 that Sidney Poitier did, which was groundbreaking to show the relationship between a white and a black man on the run, and the relationship that formed in that film. So I think there are films and things that have been done that people put themselves forward to do, that knowing that they may not have the agency to control the outcome, but just did their best work anyway. And then just to build on what's been said, I think it's so important to continue to raise up those voices as much as we can, and be advocates and allies with our best intentions, even knowing that you may also get pushback from the other side, that the power structure that you're pushing against could very well, and I know has to a lot of filmmakers, particularly female filmmakers and LGBTQ filmmakers and filmmakers of color, actually get threats and verbal or otherwise, because of the work that they do. So that's a real possibility as well that I think impact filmmakers have to be knowledgeable about.
Liz, did you have anything to add to this?
No.
No problem there. So next question, I guess this is for Brandy. As a Hawaii-based filmmaker, I'd love to hear more about the film Aloha and what relationship it has with the islands and Hawaiian culture. Mahalo.
Yeah, so, and it's interesting too, because we screened Aloha in Hawaii at the University of Hawaii, and in Hilo. Whew, thank goodness. And I was on the hot seat because it does not have a relationship with that. And I did speak with a friend of mine before we made it, who is Hawaiian, and she gave me, again, bringing her in, she gave me the meanings of Aloha and how it goes even deeper. I was initially thinking, because this was about infant loss, Aloha in my mind was, oh, it's hello and goodbye. And she was like, oh, it's so much deeper than that. And she gave me an education, which I really appreciated. And then she was the one who then brought me to the islands to screen it April of last year, where I got to talk to a lot of students about it. And so, yeah, it was that unfortunately, that's about as far as it goes. We did not cast a Hawaiian actor for the lead, but we did open up our casting to everyone, and we ended up with someone who was biracial, but not Hawaiian. And so that is pretty much the extent of it. And if you would like to see it, it's available on Vimeo. If you Google my name and Aloha, you'll be able to see it.
I'm definitely going to check that out later.
Thank you.
Another question. This is a specific one, but we might be able to answer. Do any of the panelists have advice on how I can connect to professionals who can help me get a film out to organizations and audiences dealing with mental health and suicide. My film is specifically about a veterinarian, a community at high risk for suicide.
I can comment on it. Yeah, I almost became a veterinarian, like literally got into vet school and didn't go. So I have some context there. Also, we've worked with some folks who've done mental health work through their film. So happy to connect with you offline. If like we can be helpful. There's an organization called NAMI that does, as I've heard, some really good work in mental health issues and advocacy. One of the things we try to do at a Show for Change and Movie Karma, again, is to play that matchmaker. I'm sure others here might do that as well, just to provide some organizational, hopefully, heft or context when that outreach happens from the filmmaker to the nonprofit. So if we can support you in any way, I think it's very useful to reach out to their development folks or their marketing folks, depending on the size of the nonprofit, to see if there's some collaboration that can happen before, during, or even after the film's made.
And certainly there are film festivals that focus on mental health. There's Rendezvous with Madness in Toronto, there's Au Contraire in Montreal, and I know that there are others around the world. In fact, you can probably find a film festival just about any issue or thing of change that you want to see. If you look on Film Freeway or Short Film Depot, or there's lots of other aggregate sites for film festivals, and because that's a good way, because often if it's a film festival about a particular social or political issue, people who are going to that festival, they know that they're going to see films about these things. They want that information. I don't know. I mean, those are just the ones that came off the top of my head.
Can I make a quick point about that too? When you are partnering with an organization, to be mindful of is that sometimes the bigger organizations, there's more red tape. If you can partner with someone local, especially since they tend to not get as much support, that would be wonderful. Like my next film is about sexual assault, and so I do have I'm one of the members of the Speakers Bureau for RAIN, so they will be involved in some way. However, I'm also going to be partnering with the local rape crisis center that I both went to and volunteered at in Atlanta. That way we have the global support, but then also the local support, because those local organizations appreciate it, so they need it.
Yeah, and actually,
Sheila,
go, Liz. No, you go, Liz.
I just wanted to talk about audience buckets, because yes, you would target mental health organizations and organizations that have to do with the welfare of animals. But I think thinking about the smaller buckets of audiences could also help you with any project. So for The Cave, we targeted women's studies groups, Middle Eastern studies, college programs. And then there's a subplot in The Cave about how a surgeon uses music to get him through the day and inspire him through surgery. So it's you may think that a small theme of your film may not resonate, but a nonprofit that has to do with how music impacts the lives of everyone may be really looking for a film. Open your mind beyond the central themes and think about those secondary themes as well.
Very important, yes. And that actually sort of relates what might be our last question, and for what Brandy was talking about as well. We have a filmmaker who I think is in Switzerland. She's got a film screening at the festival, and she wants to know about what do you do when you want your film to screen, have impact beyond your nation or beyond your especially for international films. I mean, she's wondering specifically about her film in the United States. What do you do? I mean, film festivals are a natural source for your short to start, because, festivals will often take films from around the world. But what about if we're stepping outside that? If you want your film from Switzerland to be seen in the United States or Japan beyond just a film festival, for example.
I mean, I can give one example. There's a film, Pascal, that we just celebrated through our film festival, which was shot by a British filmmaker about, I mentioned it earlier, about a swimming school in Mozambique, about local efforts to train young people to be safe in the water, which is such a critical part of this particular community and their livelihoods, since they fish often and earn money off of the ocean, literally. So in that case, it was obviously a very local film, a very local project, but it had international resonance, and his goal was to raise money to support that organization locally. So I think if you do have a target in mind of what you want to achieve, it could certainly resonate internationally, and then look perhaps to in other countries if there's similar work being done, who and what you'd want to support and how. Yeah, that would be my advice, because I think part of it is not to underestimate your story and really think about what your goals are with the story.
I also think doing your research on film festivals and not just aiming for the top tier ones, although they're great, but specifically the ones that tend to program stories that are like yours, because those can be anywhere in the world. And that is definitely one way to make them aware of your story, is to make sure you're targeting those and submitting to those specifically, especially since film festival submissions cost money. So you want to be you want to be thinking about your distribution as early as possible.
I would also just Google, where do Swiss people live in the United States? And then target cities where they live.
Yes, very good.
This is all so incredible, and this is like the worst part of my job, to come in and break this up. But I want to be respectful of your time, because I know it is incredibly valuable, especially right now, and you've already given us a full hour of this incredible discussion and expertise, so thank you so much. Attendees, there's much more forum programming the rest of the festival all the way through Monday, so please check that out and register for those events. I know we can't see you, but please give a silent round of applause to these incredible panelists for everything that they've done and that they're continuing to do in their own work as artivists, which is my new favorite word. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful, wonderful day and rest of the weekend.
Bye.
Thank you.